My name is Craig Smith. I work with JAHMI Health and Wellness. I've been here over a dozen years, but I've been in the field close to 40 years. So my comments reflect the arc of that career. After I got my bachelor's, I was still undecided what I wanted to do for a living. So I volunteered at a retreat center, and one of the nuns there asked me one day, had I considered counseling? I thought she was referring me to counseling. And she said, no, I mean, as a career, you seem to enjoy people. So I went back to my alma mater, got into the rehabilitation counseling program. And as I went through that, I did a combined practicum and internship at a halfway house for alcoholics and addicts. I could really relate to those individuals. At the time, I didn't know why. When I got my first job at a small rural hospital in Alabama, my supervisor noticed that no one who I assessed needed treatment. No one. And she asked me, why was that? And I said, because the same thing happens when I drink, and I know I don't have a problem. That resulted in a very strong invitation to examine my drinking, and that propelled me further personally and professionally into this field. A lot of people think that I work only with folks who are homeless, who've lost everything, who have distended livers, and that couldn't be farther from the truth. The majority of the people I work with are employed, they have homes, they have families. Of course, there are some people who have lost everything, but addiction makes no distinction about socioeconomic status or your career trajectory, your education level. I have worked with people who are attorneys, physicians, to people who are unhoused. So it's the full spectrum. I start the day preparing for my day. I start the day reviewing progress notes from the previous sessions or reviewing assessments for new clients. And then my day is a series of individual sessions. I do some couples therapy, group sessions. I supervise some people who are working towards certification or licensure. And then there's always documentation. If you didn't document it, you can't bill for those services. So there's enough variety in every day that even though it sounds the same, no 2 days are the same. When I started in this field, total abstinence was the recognized goal of treatment. Yet when I started working with people who had opioid use disorders, medications like methadone and Suboxone were being prescribed. And this was considered heretical by a lot of my peers. There was a counselor who I really respected who did a presentation on these medications for opioid use disorders. And it really made me pause and consider my own bias. I had a very strong bias. So I decided to look into it further. And I looked into it enough that I ended up becoming the director of 2 methadone programs and a consultant to a third because I found that it was so effective. So I discovered that it was my bias that was getting in the way of helping people get the treatment that had evidence behind it. There have been so many people who've inspired me. It's really hard to limit that. But one person who inspired me early on was a woman named Pat Green. She was the supervisor at the very first mental health center where I worked. And she honestly took a chance on me. I was new to the field. There was an awful lot that I didn't know. So she took me under her wing, taught me how to do a thorough assessment, how to do treatment plans, progress notes, discharge summaries, how to consult with professionals in other departments. Really, if it was not for her leap of faith, it would have been very, very difficult to get in this field, even with a degree, because everyone I was talking to said, well, you've got the degree, but you have no experience. So I needed someone who was willing to offer me that experience, and I'm eternally grateful for her. The research into psychedelic medications to treat addiction and other disorders, I think, is just fascinating. The idea of creating new neural connections by using these medications that are easily abused, but using them in the service of recovery really perks my interest. We already do that in terms of opioid use, because methadone certainly can be a drug that's abused. Suboxone can be abused. Well, psychedelics can as well. But when it's used to augment talk therapy and with a particular rigorous protocol, it can foster someone approaching reality instead of avoiding reality. It's still in its infancy, the research on this, but it's really promising and fascinating. I'm really proud of developing, implementing, and maintaining an intensive outpatient program with my current employer. One of the things that makes it so gratifying is we get a lot of referrals from the courts. So we're dealing with a population who have to be here, and yet roughly 50% choose to voluntarily continue treatment after they have satisfied the courts. So that tells me we're giving them something that they find of benefit, and we're helping them move from external motivation to internal motivation, and that's going to help them sustain their recovery efforts. And that's so gratifying to see. Again, there are so many people who have positively influenced my career. Another person who has was a counselor I worked with named Gary Johnson. Unlike a lot of people in this field, he was not a recovering alcoholic or addict, but he had this wonderful ability to relate and want to understand another person's experience to such a degree that he could foster a strong relationship and help engender change in that person. And to me, he was really a living testament that you don't have to be a recovering person to have a positive impact in the life of someone who's seeking recovery. I would encourage someone to start looking at ways to get educated. Most states have a path. There's going to be a path for certification, the path for licensure. One of the best things that I heard at a workshop once was that uh, counseling is an art, but education allows us to intelligently act on that art. And I really believe that. So I would encourage people to talk to someone who's already in the field, ask them how did they get into it, get some guidance on the local uh, professional organization that they can find in their state, whether you start as a chemical dependency tech, level 1 counselor, level 2, whatever the path is in your particular state, to go that route. There's really no end to the educational opportunities. even though we're talking about substance use, mental health disorders go hand in hand the majority of the time. So in my experience, you can't be proficient in working with substance use without also being proficient in working with mental health disorders, co-occurring disorders. Having a working knowledge of that is essential. I've been in the field long enough that it used to be siloed care. Um, Someone would come in for an assessment and maybe they had depression and alcoholism. And literally, we would ask them, which one do you want to work on? As if one was going to delay progression while we work on the other. Today, of course, we look at that as pretty ridiculous and artificial. But a lot of counselors who want to work in substance use really don't have a very good knowledge of the mental health field. And I think you have to have both if you're going to be effective in the field. I think everyone wants to make a difference in the world in their own way. And working with substance use, to me, strikes at the core of what it means to be human, our innate limitations, and our profound abilities to change. I remember the first time I heard a client at a meeting refer to me as his counselor. Uh, that was quite, it made quite an impression on me, because I've heard people refer to their doctor, their dentist, their attorney. That was the first time someone referred to me in a professional role. So I take that role as a sacred trust that I really strive to uphold. There's a lot of people to help, and I think that we really can help those people one by one.